XBRL requirements will begin in 1 minute. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining. This is Michelle Savage. I'm with XBRL US, and you are here for our webinar today, Gas Pipeline and New FERC XBRL Requirements. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm going to go through a few logistical points before I get to the agenda. I wanted to let everybody know that we are offering CPE credit for today's session. So if you're interested in getting CPE credit, just make sure that you respond to the CPE questions, which will be asked at 2 different points during the session. And even if you didn't sign up for it initially, if you respond to those questions, we can make sure that you do get your CPE credit. Also, as we go through the program, please feel free to post questions in the Q&A link that you'll see at the top of your screen. Those questions will come into us and we'll take them throughout the program. For the session today, if you have any kind of technical issues, please contact us by emailing support@xbrl.us, and we'll do our best to get you back up and online. So as I said, my name is Michelle Savage. I'm with XBRL US, and our other speaker today is Campbell Pride. Campbell is president and CEO of XBRL US, and he was also the lead in developing the FERC taxonomies that everyone is going to be working on using to comply with next year. So with that, let me go through the agenda that we're going to cover today. We're going to start off with a little bit of XBRL fundamentals. We'll then get into CPE questions, and then we'll get into really the heart of the matter, which is instructions on preparing forms 2, 2A, and 3Q natural gas. We'll have a couple of additional CPE questions, and then we'll get into other programs and events offered by XBRL US that might be of interest. So just to get started, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the XBRL standard. Extensible Business Reporting Language is an open, non-proprietary standard. It was developed initially really for financial statement information, but it also can accommodate lots of other types of data that you do see in financial reports, things like text strings, text blocks, percentages, integers, even energy-related data types. The standard is maintained by a global organization called XBRL International, which is a nonprofit standards organization. Their job really is to maintain and expand upon the specification. And they have a very active volunteer group that works on expanding the specification and looking at new technology changes that need to be accommodated, new reporting needs. They have multiple country-specific jurisdictions. So I believe there are about 27 different country-specific jurisdictions, and we are one of them. XBRL US is the US jurisdiction of XBRL International. So we are the national standard setter here in the US. And our role is to do development work, like building the FERC taxonomies, and to support adoption efforts here in the United States. So on the development side, we worked with the FERC to help build out these standards that you'll be working with. We've also worked with the Securities and Exchange Commission to build taxonomies or data standards for public company reporting, credit rating agencies, and mutual funds. And another program in the United States that we did not work on, but I think it's worth mentioning, is the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which has been requiring banks to report in XBRL standards for since 2005. I think it's also helpful to take a look at what XBRL is not, because I think sometimes there's a bit of confusion about like just what exactly is XBRL. It is a data standard. It is not a technical format like XML or JSON or CSV or HTML. In fact, XBRL provides additional structure that can be used essentially on top of XML, JSON, even HTML or even CSV. The format provides the way of transporting the information And XBRL provides the structure that ensures that it's completely unambiguously understandable and can be machine readable. XBRL is also not a product. So sometimes we hear it referred to as, oh, it's like an Excel spreadsheet or some kind of software application. It is not a product. And that's one of the benefits of the XBRL standard, is that the standard can be used in lots of different products. So that ensures that the cost of complying for preparing XBRL documents and the cost of consuming data stays low, because it relies on a competitive marketplace of tools to create, to collect, and to report and analyze the data. So how does XBRL give meaning to data? When we look at a fact that's reported, like here's an example looking at one of the schedules in a Form 2, when we look at the value, 10,890,758, we know by looking at the columns and the rows that that represents cash. But when that value is received by a computer, it needs additional information to truly understand what it is, because the computer can't read it like a human can. So in order to understand that value, we need to know that it represents cash, that's the type of concept that's being used. We need to know that it's a monetary value. We need to know what cash means in this situation, because it can mean something different depending on who's reporting it. So the fact that it's cash, that it's a monetary data type, and the definition are pieces of information that are embedded in that value as an XBRL fact. And those three elements, or those three pieces of information, are found in the taxonomy, the FERC taxonomy that you'll be working with. We also need to know who's the reporting entity, what kind of currency is used, what's the time period. And that information, the fact that it's Northern Natural Gas Company, that it's in US dollars for the period 2019, that is information that is also embedded in that fact, but that comes through in the XBRL report itself, the instance document that you as filers will create. So the taxonomy is a digital dictionary of concepts. And what you're looking at here is Schedule 110 from Form 2. And it just shows the hierarchy or the structure of the terms in the digital dictionary of terms called the FERC taxonomy. And within each schedule, there are a variety of concepts. And I'm actually going to turn over to Campbell Pride now, because he could talk a little bit more closely about how this appears in the taxonomy. Campbell?
Thanks, Michelle. And so here we have an example of the balance sheet for the Form 2. And so you can see on the right-hand side, it's got some details about that. And yet some of you are probably familiar with and probably I know a lot of people put comments in to the FERC. And this comes from the Yeti viewer. And so up the top, and if you go to the Yeti viewer, which we'll have a look at in a little bit if you haven't seen it, for those who aren't familiar with it, it basically gives you information about the information that has to be reported. So for cash, you can see it has at the top the labels, the different labels it can be called. And depending on which schedule it appears, an item appears, and the labels could be different. If it's a roll forward, then obviously the opening balance and the closing balance labels will be different for it. So that's all captured in this label information. So that's all there. Just dropping to the bottom, there's a number of properties associated with each of these elements. As Michelle mentioned, you can see there's a monetary item type. It's measured at a point in time, obviously because it's cash with a period type of instant. And it's got a balance of a debit balance. And there's an item there which is nillable, which is true. If you see that, what that means is that it can have a value. You can put a value in of nil, so which means that I'm not reporting a value for this item. So it lets you do that. In the middle, there's something called references. And what these references are, they are basically like a map back to the original form that was, the original FERC forms. So they have a map back to those. Just to be aware of one thing, these references, however, are really more of a map into the VisualFox Pro database and the location that it was in those. And those generally will comply to what they are on the form. However, in some cases, you may notice some differences between the references that are here and the actual physical location on the form. in some cases, there are some particular schedules where the Visual Fox Pro database, they did them differently. So the primary reason to having these references was one, as a way to convert data from historical filings, which we'll show you in a minute, but also as a way so that you could, you had a way to track from what you previously reported on the form. To make up for those differences, we're actually going to, and you'll see this on our website, we've started to do it for the Form 2, and we've nearly finished it for the Form 1, but you'll see there's a map which basically tells you for this row, for this column, this is the equivalent, this is what the element and the period and dimensions I should use when I'm putting this information in XBRL. So that's going to should give you a clean map for any piece of information that you've reported traditionally on the forms, so you know exactly where it needs to go. And this is an example of that mapping here. You can see this is the row number, the column number, it tells you what the label of the item is. It'll give you the element name that you should use for it, what time period you should put on it, and then any dimensions that might be associated with it. For the balance sheet, there aren't any dimensions, so that doesn't really apply in this case. This can be quite useful. There are some periods which, sometimes these periods are cumulative on some of these forms. In the past, when we were looking at the historical data in the Visual Fox Pro database, in some of these schedules, it was unclear whether, for some of these roll forwards, was it the opening balance from the start of the quarter that you were reporting or from the start of the year? And actually some companies had reported that same, that what we would expect to be the same data differently. So we're hopefully going to clarify that as well as part of this process, so that we'll get consistent data there. So that's kind of one of the things that's there, and that's available on the website, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and you can go and have a look at that. The taxonomy itself, as we mentioned, includes these data types. So you can have items, there's various different data types that are used within the taxonomy. Primarily, everything is, primarily most of the stuff is a monetary item, but there are certain measures of, things like area and length. What's the length of an oil pipe, of a gas pipeline, for example. There's those kind of disclosures, and in some cases you have to report, you have to report the units associated with those, and we're kind of trying to standardize the units here as well, and that's also included in the taxonomy, what unit to use. The FERC in the past has pretty much defined the unit that you need to use for most of these disclosures, and but that's also incorporated in the taxonomy. And you'll see there's a label that says for measures of length, you've got to use what is the appropriate unit, be it miles or kilometers or whatever. I think it's miles, but that's in there as well. And also there's measurements for energy and volume as well. But that's all explained in the taxonomy, and we can show you that in a minute. In addition, the taxonomy contains a number of relationships, and you've probably seen this if you've looked at the ETI taxonomy. There's a presentation relationship which just shows you really what that's really showing is really what's the order of items, so you can kind of gives you some familiarity to the form. It also defines the calculations. Not all the calculations, but some of the calculations that actually can be defined. So this is really telling you, like on the balance sheet or the cash flow statement, what's rolling up into operating cash flows or changing cash flows. So that information is captured there to some extent. In addition to the calculations, there are a bunch of validations. They are not included in the taxonomy directly. You can't see those in Yeti, but they are provided by the FERC and they're available on their website, and you can download those. And there's open source software available. It means you can validate them, and we're going to make that software available on our website as well. The software is available on our website, but also will be available interactively. So if you want to validate a filing, you can do that. Plus on the FERC website, when you make the submission, you can validate it before you file and then give you the validation results back. And we're providing guidance as well on what those validations are, just so everyone's clear what they are. We talked about the definition link base. That's basically shows the relationships between concepts and what can appear on a table. If you try and report some data that doesn't appear in a schedule, for example, let's say you try and report a concept on an axis, and it can't go on that axis. It can't try and report a concept on a schedule, which is like a sequence schedule, which we'll talk about. In that then this definition link base will stop you from reporting it. It'll give you an error. It says, look, you can't report this line item here. So that definition is primarily used to, what's called a definition link base, is primarily used to restrict putting in data you didn't mean to put data you didn't mean to put in. This also includes references, which we talked about, and labels, which we also talked about. Go to the next slide. I think we've gone backwards, not forward. And this it's just really more of a dictionary explanation of what the difference between these two things are. The taxonomy on the left, this is defining everything that's should be reported, all the data that should be reported, and the XBRL instance report is really the actual data that is reported. So you can think of the taxonomy in a paper-based paradigm. There's basically a blank form. And the XBRL instance is basically all the data that would populate that form. Now, the information so this means that there's certain information you don't obviously have to report, but then there's certain information you do. So you got to report the number. You also have to report, with the number or the fact of the data that you're reporting. Plus, you also have to report it within that, tell us what unit it is, if it's in US dollars. And you also have to tell us things like, how accurate that is. So that data is included in the XBRL instance, but really the instance is really just there to collect the individual data that Michelle was talking about. But there are some additional things there that you need to include in the filing, which is the unit, and also obviously the period that data is applicable to. What that means is that if you want to roll forward to the next year, then because you put the period on it, that data doesn't really need to be re-entered. If the software you're using should take that into account, that means you hopefully, which would be similar to what you had with Visual Fox Pro, you should be able to roll forward from one year to the next without having to re-enter all the historical data. So if you want to go to the next slide, please, Michelle. So I think we're going to jump to some CPE questions.
That's right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and launch the polling. And again, for those of you who are interested in getting CPE, please take a look at your screen and make sure you respond to the questions that are asked. We're going to cover two right now. So the first question is, an XBRL instance document or an XBRL report can be best characterized by which of the following statements? It represents the facts reported in a financial statement, for example, Natural Gas Company's 2019 Form 2. It represents a digital dictionary of concepts that need to be reported, or it represents the hierarchical structure and relationship between items needed to be reported in a financial statement. Which of these statements best represents an XBRL report or instance document? And we're going to give it about another 15 seconds. Okay, we're going to close down the polling here. Thank you for answering. All right, and we'll go to our next question. Which statement best represents the definition of the XBRL standard? It is a technical format like XML, JSON, or CSV. It is an open, non-proprietary standard that renders financial and other types of data into machine-readable format. Or it is a product like Excel or a software application that makes data computer readable. Which statement best represents what the XBRL standard means? And we've got like another 30 seconds here. Okay, I'll get another 10 seconds here. Okay, we're going to shut down the polling and move on in our presentation. Thank you. Okay, so Campbell, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay, so we're just going to go through some of the instructions, and what we basically did was we went through and we created a whole bunch of filings. We took all the historical data and we basically, that had been filed with the FERC for the Form 2 and then converted that into a Form 2. So, and after we go through some of these items, we'll show that how you can get that on the FERC website. You should be able to download your historical filings and what they look like in an XBRL format. So you can kind of see what the end product's going to be. But by going through that, I think there's a few things that are worth talking about just so you understand them. And when you're looking for software products or looking at using software, if you kind of understand what's going on a little bit in the background, it'll be helpful to ask the right questions. And also if there's problems where if the software is not producing the right results for some reason, you're going to be able to express to them what the issue is. So hopefully this will be helpful for you. And we'll make the PowerPoints available, obviously. So I don't expect you to remember all this, but just trying to give you an idea of some of the things just to be aware of. So we go to the next slide, Michelle. So type dimensions. So on this, this really allows the reporting of sequences. So this is things like if you've got like some schedules which like have the gas property and capacity leased from others, for example, you can basically just start listing out all of these, all those individual items, or that you've got entities that are controlled by others. So if you've got those lists, you can then basically, you can keep adding and adding and adding and adding and adding to that list. And some of those items can be, in the historical forms, that would be, you'd just be adding another schedule, adding another schedule, adding another schedule, adding another schedule. So you kind of just keep doing them. And that's handled in XBRL using something called a type dimension. And that's the main place that it's used. So you'll see this a lot in the Form 2 taxonomy. So just want you to be aware of it. And the term that's used, the FERC's been using for these, is just these sequences. So it's just a sequence that could run and run and run. So this differs from the traditional way that the Form 2 was done. Rather than just doing one page, then another page, and another page, you just keep going and just keep entering them in. So when you see software that's doing this, which you'll probably just see, rather than it splitting off a page, it'll just keep running them on and on and on. It's also used in those cases where on some schedules you have the blank rows, like the cash flow statement and the retained earnings statement. And in those, you had some additional, you had like blanks where you could put a total in, or maybe if you only had one or two items, you could enter those in. What this does, this means you can put infinite blank rows in it effectively. And they basically, if you've got a blank row in row 7, then you could put in 10 items, and on the schedule, it'd be like 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, et cetera, et cetera. And this gets around what had been done in the past, where those items being disclosed, that usually you'd put the total in and then you'd put a footnote on. So you don't have to do that anymore. Footnotes are still available. You can still use footnotes, but this just gives you the ability to be able to just put all those items into the schedule. And in the cash flows, I think there's like 7 locations where you can do that. In the retained earnings, I think it's like, from memory, there's 4 or 5. So in the retained earnings, same things. It's what's the movements, the credits and the debits. You can put as many items in there as you like, but that uses a type dimension. So you'll see in the taxonomy, you'll see that they've got schedule 118, for example, for the retained earnings, or 114 for the cash flow. They'll have like a whole, they've got like a set of items there. And that's the reason you see that is because it's giving you the option to basically fill out all these blank rows. The type dimension itself, you basically define a member that's defined on it. And what that means is each individual row has an identifier. You basically, a member is like saying, this is row 1, or this is row 2, or this is row 3. So those members can be defined, you define. However, the members should be consistent from period to period. So if you've got a gas property that you've leased and you put a member on that, then you want to use that same member from one filing to the next. The members that you put on something do not control the order in which they appear, and we'll talk about that next. But the members really represent something which represents that individual item. And basically, when the form is rendered, it basically said these are all the items that apply to that particular row. So, for example, if it's a gas property that's been leased, then you may say on that, it's like, it has specific data about it. And if you use that, you report that same property in the next filing, you want to make sure that you use the same member for those same facts. And the reason for that is that you get, so that people using the data can get comparability from one period to the next, and they can see how things have changed. But then you obviously can use that data internally as well if you want to use it. So that's the next point. These items, those members should be consistent over time. Every fact that's going to be in one of those schedules is going to have, that's on a row, should have that same sequence dimension and member on it. So basically, if you've got information that's typically on a row, it's just going to have every one of those facts would have the same member. And in some cases, some of these schedules will have a total at the bottom. The only difference, the elements which are the total will be the same element that's used for each of the individual rows. However, it just won't have a dimension on it. It won't have that sequence axis on it. So if you're looking at the taxonomy in Yeti, you'll see there's usually a cube, which is basically like a square, blue square cube in Yeti. And underneath that, you'll have something called an axis. And then the axes that are type dimensions have a different symbol. And they basically, whenever you see those, you know, oh, okay, I can just add as many rows as I want. We go to the next slide, please, Michelle. Sorting, so just so you know, on these, when you put all this data into your XBRL instance, when you render it, you can control the order in which they appear, and there's something called an order number, and that doesn't appear on the schedule itself. That's just basically in the XBRL instance, but it controls the order in which things will appear. And those, so you can have a member and you can have different member names on it. The members don't control in any way the order that the rows will appear on a schedule. You got to use the order number to do that. So you don't need to name your members certain things to make the order change. You know, that doesn't matter. However, in the examples that we sent out, we basically used the row numbers that were there as both the member and the order number, because typically they, you know, that's the way that the order was. So that's just kind of how it came out. So a lot of people had asked us that question. I just want to be clear that the two things are separate. They just happen to be same for the rendering because we had no other data that we could use to do it. It must be a decimal. The reason for that is if you want to change the order, you can do things like 1.02 or 1.022 if you want to insert items or change the order of it. So it gives you flexibility over that. The order numbers always must use a dimension as well. So you've got to say, you know, this order number applies to this row, so which is kind of obvious. But if you have an order number with no dimension on it, then it's invalid. So every order number you would expect to have a type dimension associated with it. And as I mentioned earlier, the order for the migrated data was just taken from the row number from the original filing. And as you know, some of these schedules repeat. You know, they might have subschedule 1, subschedule 2, subschedule 3, and you'll see on some of those the order number keeps going up, but the members on those will be like 1-2, 1-3, and then the next schedule will be 2-3, 2-4. So that's kind of how it was done. But the order numbers themselves just basically sequenced out. So in those cases, we've got multiple schedules repeated. You'll see a difference there. Some schedules, to be aware that some schedules have multiple dimensions on them. This is the case when a schedule has a subtotal. So in the mapping that we're going to make available to everyone, this will explain this clearly. So then it's just making sure that you put the order number on the right dimension so that the subtotal appears at the bottom of the subtotal. You know, if you get those wrong, you might have all the subtotals at the bottom of the schedule, which kind of doesn't look good. You probably want to put them in the right place. Okay, next slide, please, Michelle. Duplicate values. You can't enter duplicate values. So what this means is if you've got something on a value on a subschedule and you've got a value like on the balance sheet, you don't have to enter that value twice. It only is entered once. Now this differs from what the VFP was in the past. You'd enter it in twice, and sometimes they had a validation check to make sure that those two are the same. That doesn't work like this next. If you put it in the balance sheet, it's going to appear as the total of the subschedule. If you're on the subschedule, when you validate, it's going to appear in the balance sheet. It's the same number. So you can't enter both. You can't enter them both twice. And if you do, there's a validation check to say, "Hey, you've entered this number twice. Can you just get rid of one?" So values on the subschedule are tagged the same as they are on the schedule. There's no difference. You don't put a schedule number or anything associated with them. In some cases, we went through the data and we looked, and in some cases there were values that are on a subschedule on the balance sheet or income statement that were different for enough times that in some cases you may see, oh, this element that's on the balance sheet or on the main schedule, or cross-references to another one as a different element. And the reason that that exists is because we saw a significant number of cases where the two of the values were different. So you really couldn't just put one number in. So if you see that, that's the reason. If you think they should always be the same, you should put a comment into the FERC and let them know, hey, these really should be the same. If they are the same element, but you do have different values in each of the subschedules, then you should put the value from the main schedule in, and then put a note on the element, just on the fact, a footnote on them to indicate that this is different in the subschedule and this is the reason why. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Accuracy in units, basically all monetary units you have to put in as US dollars. Any other items that are not US dollars, they have a label on the element which tells you what unit to use. So the software should tell you that. And there's also validation checks that if you put the wrong unit on, it's going to tell you you've used the wrong unit. And also, this must be accurate to the dollar. So there's actually a decimal attribute on that. That should be set to 0. So you should always be able to, that should always be set to 0 when you're doing the filings. Now, the software will probably take care of that for you, but you may just, if you're looking at software, just make sure, hey, can I set the decimals? And make sure that you got control over these other things that we've talked about. Do you support type dimensions? Do you support units? Just to make sure that the software that you're going to use is going to support those things. And at the end, we're going to go through software which we know will be doing this. So if you go to the next slide, please, Michelle. Periods. So all facts have a period, and basically the periods are determined based on the report year and the report period. These are two fields that you've got to enter, and the FERC will not accept your filing if you do not. These are required fields. And what these do is when the form is validated and when they render it, these two fields are used to put all the data in the appropriate places on the schedule. So it's really, really important that these are the first two things you should tag, because this determines what are all the periods that are going to be. So this also means if you change a period, if you take an old filing and you change the period and you roll it forward 1 year, then all the values that were in your current period will then, if you re-render it, will appear in the prior period. So basically you can change where the facts appear on the schedule. We're changing the periods. So across this different periods that can be used, obviously it's the current period, the current year or the current quarter or the cumulative quarters. On some of these other schedules, there's lots of cumulative quarter data as well that's provided. So you just need to make sure that when you put these periods in, you're getting those correct. And the periods really, it's a point in time, it's just the date. What was the value of this at this date? And if it's a period of time, you're just going to put the start date in and the end date in. So if it's a year, it's always going to be 0101, whatever the year is, 1231. They're kind of fixed. This is talked about on the filer guide. It tells you all the periods that you could possibly use within the filing. And we're putting out instructions as well, and you'll see that on the website, which basically tells you for each schedule what period you should be using for it. Validation rules also check that appropriate periods are used. If you've got a fact with an incorrect period, it'll give you a validation error saying, this element can't have this period on it. Things like quarterly cash flows, so you got to make sure you use the right opening balance, closing balance on those, and sometimes you're just going to make sure you get those periods right. The opening balance won't be the same as the closing balance on a cash flow for a quarter, for example. And there are some schedules that report cumulative amounts, so just to be aware of those versus the amounts just for the specific quarter. And you can see that in some roll forwards where it's a quarter versus a year-to-date roll forward. And that always wasn't clear on the original schedule. So hopefully this should make this a lot clearer going forward. We go to the next slide, please. Text block items. So there is the capacity for you to copy, if you're an SEC filer and you filed with the SEC and you've basically filed your forms and you're going to, with the SEC, and you want to put those notes into the form 2, you can do that as well. The only thing to be aware of, if you're filing an inline XBRL, you basically have to make sure that you don't have the inline XBRL in there. In the actual footnotes that you file with the FERC. The reason for that is when these forms are rendered, they actually generate they're actually an inline XBRL document. So you kind of have a Russian doll situation where you've got an inline document inside an inline document, which you're not allowed to have. The FERC do not require that you have the SEC tags in there. The taxonomy, because it's the FERC taxonomy, it doesn't use the US GAAP taxonomy, so those tags would kind of be confusing anyway. But you can easily get that if you just go to the SEC's. When you file with the SEC, they actually strip out the inline XBRL, so you can actually take the results of that and just copy and paste it into the FERC form, and then it'll render exactly the same way. It'll look exactly the same. So that should be the same. We've tested that on a number of filings. But if you've got any questions about that, I'm more than happy to answer it. The only difference, they have to be valid XHTML, which what they have to be for the SEC anyway. And styling is included in the FERC rendering form. So when you look at these forms, they look like the original form. That's because they're being styled. The one thing you may want to do is when you copy it in, is just go through and make sure that the styling is exactly the way that you want. Everything in the footnote looks the way you expect. It generally should, because we've tried to stay away from using wording which others have used in their SEC filings, but there could be a situation where they overlap. So you may want to look, and if it's not formatted properly, then you should work probably with your software vendor, or just look at the styling that you have used and maybe change the name of it, just make sure there's not a conflict. But the examples we looked at, that didn't happen. Okay, so the next one. Next slide, please. Subtotals, just to make you aware of this, some schedules do have subtotals. FERC data, when the FERC data was migrated, we didn't know which lines were subtotals. So there was no way to tell. It's just a text string. So what happened is all of those items came across and then basically came as an individual sequence. So on the migrated data, there will be validation. If you validated the migrated data, you will find that there are validation errors. And the reason for this is because the subtotals get counted twice. So going forward, when you prepare those schedules, you won't, on the subtotals, you won't be using a sequence item on them. They'll have a different, they'll just basically have just usually a type dimension will be a total. Sorry, we'll have an explicit dimension on them, so they won't have the type dimension, so you won't get the validation error. But just to be aware that migrated data will. So if you're going forward and you roll and you say, oh, the migrated data looks great, I'm just going to take that and use that because it's the same. Just be aware that some of these subtotal lines you may have to retag. Okay, next item. All right, so let's talk about validation. So the FERC will be publishing these validation rules. You probably won't be doing it yourself. They'll be built into the software tools. However, if you want to do that, the validation rules, there's just like one set of validation rules for each form type. So the same validation rules apply to the Form 2, the Form 2A, and the Form 2Q. So you don't need different validation rules for those. That's just one set. They generally will check totals and they'll both do the adding down of a schedule plus adding across. So if it's got a roll forward, so generally they'll apply to both of those. If you've got a sequence tables, they'll add them all up and make sure they add to the total. They also include rules to check that the periods are correct, check the units are correct, check that required elements are actually present in the filing. And the instructions we're currently working on and I'm going to put up on our website, they're going to include descriptions of the validations as well. You can run the validations yourself if you wanted to. We're going to make the validations available on our website. So you can just take your filing and then just basically submit it. Then I'll give you a report back of what all the validation errors are, FERC validation errors are. And then the software that you can download and you can run it on your Mac or PC or locally, or your IT department can sort that out so you can run it as well. And that's open source software and that'll be freely available. And I'll show you where that is in a minute. So we can go to the next slide. The rendering, currently at the moment, when you file your form with the FERC, they'll give you a rendering back, but they'll render the entire form as one big thing. That takes a little bit of time just to render the whole thing. So they didn't allow you to render a specific schedule. We put something up on our website so you can render an individual schedule so you can see what it looks like if you want to. And then software vendors will probably do the same thing. So just want to make sure you're aware of it. When the FERC render those documents and you review them, you probably want to review them in these documents as looking like a traditional form because it's easy to review. They are inline XBRL documents as well, so you can view them in an inline viewer, or you can change the styling on them to highlight things if you want. So it gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of how you can do the review, and we'll show you that in a minute. Okay, you want to go to the next slide, Michelle? And then footnotes. Just to let you know, and because people have asked this question, the footnotes kind of handled the same way they were in the past. So you can attach footnotes to any individual fact that's reported in the filing, and they will appear at the bottom of the filing, so you can see those. And they are there are a couple of so the software that you use, you want to look at this, make sure it supports footnotes. There's two types of footnote. There's a fact footnote, which is kind of what you're familiar with. It's, oh, here's this fact and here's the footnote that appears at the bottom. But there's also something called a footnote, which is kind of links from one fact to another fact. And this is used to request that data is confidential. And that's basically says this footnote will link, it's basically links one fact to another. And then this is used to indicate the if you want data to be treated as confidential, then you can do that by putting it in the filing. This was available in the VisualFox Pro program. I don't think anyone ever requested this. The FERC would have to approve it, and if they did approve it, then the filing would be filed, and the data would be blacked out in the filing, but it would say this data has been treated as confidential, it's not being shown, and I think they call it it's been redacted. So there is an option to do that within this mechanism as well. And I think that's in the law, so that was always an option. So we just want to make sure that was incorporated, and that's done through footnotes. Okay, if you go to the next slide, please. I think we've got a CP. Okay. Why don't I just quickly show you some of the stuff on the website, where to go to, and then we can go through some of the working with vendors.
That sounds good, Campbell. I'm not sharing my screen now.
Okay. So on the XBRL US homepage, we've basically put up tools that will help you do this. And then if you go to XBRL.US, we have something called filers, and there's FERC reporting, which is here. There's a page for tools and instructions. And what this basically covers is this will allow you to be able to render a filing. And it will give you links to instructions for the form 1. Here's the form 2. So if you click on these, it just tells you it gives you an overview of how you'd basically tag those items, tag that particular schedule. And there's a map. We have a map for which just basically tells you this row, this column, this is the item, this is the period that we're telling you, that I showed you before. We also have the ability to render a filing. So I choose a filing here. You've got it submitted just as a zip file, but you just take your instance file and make it a zip file. So here's XBRL zip. It's form 2. This is for Gulfstream natural gas systems. And let's say I just want to do the corporation controlled by respondent. And I can submit it, and then it'll basically go off and it'll render that schedule. There's a couple of things here. You can only include financial statement facts, which means that what this does is that it basically says, because it's creating an inline document, it's only going to take the facts that are in that schedule and put them in the inline. If you don't click this, it's going to take every fact and then put it in there. So you can open it. This form's blank, but I did some of this for Gulfstream, and you can, so this is I think I did this one. I just rendered the balance sheet as well for it. So, and then it also, when you render it, it'll also put in the footnotes as well. So this has got a link that they had on the original filing, system balancing gas. If you want to see the end of it, if you want to try it out and try and render those things, you can get you just need your original instance XBRL instance file. FERC's made this available on their website. So if you go to ecollectionsferc.gov, and the link to this is on our website, so you can see that. And then you can go to the public submission here. You have to log in with your CID, which I think all of you should have. Gone to the wrong place, of course. Let's go back. There we go. They have tokens on it, so then this gives a list, and this basically here, you can see this is migrated data they had. So if you wanted to get SP pipeline, that's form 6, it's going to get a form 2. With the form 2As, here's a form 2, here's garden banks. So if you click on this, then it brings up another screen, which some of you may be familiar with some of the other things that FERC's been showing. And then you can see the XBRL file, and then you can download it. Then you can download it, and if you want to render an individual schedule, then you can see that. So if you want to change it and render it, see what it looks like, that's available to you. So you can do that. The other thing, just before Michelle goes through the vendors, is just so you're aware, is on the website as well, we have like the applications. If you want to run these applications locally, we've put up just a repository of the software that the FERC uses. And this is basically will allow you to validate the software and render the software if you want to do it locally, if you want to have your IT group do it. If your software vendor says, oh no, we don't do the validation, then you can do it. Or you might say to them, look, take this software and integrate it into your software. So that's available. It's open source. Just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that. It's not, if someone says, you know, if you're being told, oh, you have to pay extra to get validation, we can do that for you through our website, or you can do that through directly through the from the FERC, and they'll validate the filing before you file as well. This software here will both do the rendering of the form as an inline document and also as a and we'll also do the validation of the filing. And then filing any events we have coming up. We haven't put any data up because no one's obviously filing the data yet, but once the data is available, we're going to be making that available on the website as well. So you'll be able to get that data. And so be able to see that. And then finally, any education. This is just basically give you a list of any upcoming webinars that we're doing. So if you're interested, if you go to the subsidiaries that report, then you know, if you're doing the forms, we've got oil pipelines, we're doing those as well. So anyway, that just gives you an idea of what's on the website, so you have it. I'm going to stop sharing and hand it back to Michelle, who's going to go through the vendors.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Yeah, thank you, Campbell. We wanted to give you a sense of, you know, what vendors are out there. And, you know, obviously we know that you probably work with some other providers right now. You may work with these providers. These happen to be members of XBRL US who have experience in doing SEC filings and, you know, working with lots and lots of customers. And so we just wanted to let you know who is out there, you know, who you can turn to. And, you know, frankly, we suggest that you you know, reach out to all of them and, you know, check out what their offerings are. So there's Advanced Computer Innovations, Data Tracks, Donnelly Financial Solutions, Iris Business Services, NobleWorks, P3 Data Systems, RDG Filings, and Workiva. And these are all, many of them I'm sure you're familiar with, and we're actually very happy that they are supporting the implementation. And you know, they have great tools, and you know, frankly, you know, we're happy to help them because they are members. You know, learn how to work with the taxonomy and you know, provide efficient services. And as you start talking to vendors, and we know this is probably one of the first things that you're thinking about right now. Okay, I was told that I'm showing slides, not the slideshow. Okay, sorry, hang on one second. Let me just reshare. All right, sorry about that. Hopefully this is on the right screen now. Okay, so questions that you should really think about asking when you talk to potential vendors is, you know, first of all, does your application support FERC validation? Does it do type dimensions? Because those are really critical pieces that you want to make sure that you're doing. And also, you know, something to think about is that there are different types of vendors. You know, some are will provide you access to a tool that you can use on your own. They'll provide you with you know, documentation on how to use it. Some will provide consulting services and basically take your filing and prepare it and provide review materials back to you and handle it all themselves. Or there may be something in between. So there's lots of different types of vendors that you can work with. Find out what kind of experience they have preparing XBRL for other entities. You know, there are different programs going on. There are programs in the United States, there are programs outside the United States. Just make sure that you're working with somebody that has experience. Ask them how long it's going to take them to prepare the filing. We know that sometimes timing is an issue, and you may have last minute changes that you need to make, and you want to make sure that you have a good timeline set out. Find out how you can review the XBRL tags that are used on each fact that you report. And what's the review process? Do they provide a printout of the whole rendered filing so that you can review it and discuss it internally? Check to see, are there multiple parties internally that need to review that form? Do you need to have it go to compliance, to legal, to accounting, whoever? If you need to make a change in a value that's been reported in a statement that has already been put in XBRL format, how long is it going to take the vendor to make that change? And then how will the process differ the second time around, which sounds a bit strange, but the first time around, your vendor and you are going through the process and figuring out how things are going to work. What we have found with most implementations of XBRL is that the second time around, it's much faster and easier. And the third time and the fourth time, it just continues getting easier because there's experience, there's understanding, and frankly, all of the element tags have been chosen at that point. And I think I already mentioned, can the vendor give you a printout of the rendering? So these are some of the things that you should think about. And, we're not promoting one vendor over another. We're just saying that these are companies that we know have successfully provide XBRL services to lots of other, primarily SEC filers. And now I'm going to get into our final two CPE questions. And so just bear with me a second. I'm going to pull up. Okay, so this is poll number 3. And the question is, which statement below best describes the FERC taxonomy? Is it an open taxonomy, which means that FERC filers have the ability to create new custom reported items that are not in the current FERC taxonomy? Is it a closed taxonomy, which means that FERC filers are limited to using only the concepts provided in the FERC taxonomy? Or is it a hybrid taxonomy, which means that FERC allows some custom extensions to be created, but not others? So we'll give you about another 30 seconds to respond to that. Okay, just like another 15 seconds here. Okay, we're going to close the polling down and go on to our next and final poll. Okay, which of the items below are not found in a taxonomy? Is it hierarchy of concepts? Is it data types, for example, monetary, string, or text block? Or units, for example, currency or measures of volume or energy? Which is not found in a taxonomy? Okay, and when we close down these pollings, it was suggested that I share the answers, which we will send to you in an email that we send tomorrow. And I'll share those answers with you in just a few seconds here. We'll just take another 15 seconds for this poll. Okay, I'm going to close down the poll now. There we go. Okay, let me just give you the answer to this last question. Which of the items are not found in a taxonomy? Units. Units are only found in the instance document. So the units, such as, okay, this is reported in US dollars or in euros, that is reported in the instance document, but not in the taxonomy. And the second question, or the third question that we had, which statement best describes the FERC taxonomy? You'd really consider to be a closed taxonomy. So as filers, you will be limited to only the elements that are available within the taxonomy as it stands today. And in some ways, that's a better situation because it removes ambiguity and it produces can produce much higher quality, more consistent data. So the last things that we wanted to go through, I just wanted to bring up the screen again and show you the FERC reporting platform that Campbell was talking about, and you can get to it either from our homepage or by going to xbrl.us/FERC-reporting. And we'll be sending this out to you along with the slides and a replay of the webinar over the next couple of days. And again, as Campbell mentioned, under tools and instruction, here we include step-by-step instructions as well as mapping guides on how to prepare your document in XBRL format. There will be a rendering tool. There is a rendering tool there available. There's access to the taxonomy itself. And then coming soon, we'll be able to give you access to FERC validation rules so that you can check an instance document as you prepare it. The run applications locally, you can run everything on your local environment if there's some issue with uploading your documents to another server. Data is another coming soon. We'll be getting all the historical data up there. And then education, right now we just have events up there, some of the events that you're going through right now, but we'll have other things like FAQs and other types of instructional materials that we think will be helpful. So we will send a link out to everybody, and there's a lot of content on there. We're going to be continuously adding content to this page because we want to make sure that you get a good start and start getting ready now for XBRL preparation in 2021. And much of it is freely available content. There is kind of enhancements that are available for organizations that choose to become FERC filer members of XBRL US, but please check it out and let us know what you think. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that we do have some additional instructional webinars coming up. We have one for oil pipeline companies, December 1st, centralized service companies, December 2nd, and electric transmitting utilities, December 10th. And those are, again, similar to this program. They're going to be a webinar really talking through the process. And then finally, I also wanted to invite you to attend our investor forum, which is an annual event that we hold. This is going to be, it's our first virtual event that we've held like this, and it's going to be 2 half days. And we have keynote speakers from the Securities Exchange Commission and also a vice chair from PwC, as well as a lot of other different interesting panels that could be of interest. So please check those out, and we'll be sending you materials out tomorrow. And if you're getting CPE, you should be getting your certificate shortly. And I want to thank everybody for coming, and we hope to see you at future webinars. And I don't think we have any additional questions. Any questions there? Nope, we do not. Okay. All right, thanks very much. And we hope to see you at our next webinar.